Okay, we are recording, and this is our second to the last by hook or crook book study on Falling Upward. And so we're going to be hopefully reading a little faster today, and we might be reading really fast next Wednesday so that we can get done. We're on page 137. That means we've got 33 pages to get through to be done, because we got to go to page 160. 33 pages in 2 sessions. I don't know. Let's see what we can do.
Aren't we skipping over the best parts here, Dave?
What's that?
Aren't we skipping over the best parts if we
What
rush?
parts are you referring to? At the very end, you mean?
I don't know. I haven't read any.
No. Actually, at 161, he goes into a meditation on a poem by Thomas Merton that he calls a coda. And then after that, he's just into notes and all the end matter. So it's not, the actual text ends at 160.
Okay.
But you all should definitely read the notes on the poem of Thomas Merton by yourselves.
Okay.
Yeah, we just won't have the chance to do it together. All right, so we should probably dive right in and see how many tracks we can make here. So brand new chapter 12, new problems, new directions. And we just finished the chapter on the Shadowlands, dealing with the dark side of our psyche that also gets dredged up during the second half of life, which is absolutely essential. If we don't deal with our dark shadow constructively, it's going to play out unconsciously, destructively in our lives. And so it's very important for us to be able to balance those two. And it's essential that we come to terms with our shadow side. So all of that is what we just covered. So now we got some new problems and new directions. We've got a little quote here from the Dalai Lama: learn and obey the rules very well so you will know how to break them properly. I like that. If Gail was here, we could relate it back to giving permission to be able to break the rules, think outside the box and all of that. That's what she was asking yesterday. Okay, if you are on course at all, your world should grow much larger in the second half of life. But I must tell you that in yet another paradox, your circle of real confidants and truly close friends will normally grow smaller, but also more intimate. Is anybody experiencing that right now at this point in life? Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The world gets bigger, your circle of friends gets smaller. You are no longer surprised or angered when most people and even most institutions are doing first half of life tasks. In fact, that is what most groups and institutions and young people are programmed to do. Don't hate them for it. Now, I think one thing that just a clarification, and I think this is what he means in the next couple of paragraphs, but it's not that they are doing first half of life tasks in the first half of life, and then in the second half of life, we stop doing first half of life tasks, because that obviously is patently untrue. We have to keep doing first half of life tasks as long as we're breathing. Otherwise, we won't be. So, but what we won't be doing is first half of life tasks with first half of life attitudes. Our attitudes are going to change to second half of life. And so we will find a balance even as we do those first half of life tasks, because we'll be able to see and focus also on the task within the task that is always connective and is always connected to everything, everyone and everything, including God's presence, however we understand that. So I think he's going to flesh that out, but I wanted to make that point clear. So let's see if now that seems to come clear as we read the rest of it. Institutions must by necessity be concerned with membership requirements, policies, procedures, protocols, and precedents. If they are working organizations, they need to have very clear criteria for hiring and firing, for supervision and management. Boy, this is starting to sound like Kathy's HR department. And have rules for promotion and salaries. What was that, Kathy?
I said that's right.
There you go. Yeah, hiring and firing, supervision and management, rules for promotion and salaries. They have to be seriously concerned about lawsuits and litigation. You would you would resent them even more if they did not do these things well. But these are nevertheless ego needs and not soul needs. That is our common dilemma. And it is not easily resolved, but it can be a very creative tension. We avoid this necessary and creative tension when we try to resolve and end it all with old shibboleths, like in the real world or on the bottom line. Okay, so there's a word. How many of you know shibboleth? Nobody knows shibboleth. Okay.
Something tells me you do.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd heard it before, but I had to look it up so that I could clearly define it for you all. You know, it's a Hebrew word, first of all, but it means the part of the grain that's edible, or it means a flood, neither of which meanings have anything to do with why he's using it here. It has to do with the passage in Judges 12, where Gideon had defeated the Ephraimites, but they were mixed in with his own men and nobody knew which were which. So they used the word shibboleth. Each person that they didn't recognize would have to say the word shibboleth. And if they pronounced it one way, then they knew he was a Jew. And if he pronounced it another way, they knew that because of the dialect that he was an Ephraimite. And then he got killed. So
Secret code word, huh?
supposedly they killed like 42,000 of these guys by using this word. And so what shibboleth has come to mean is a custom, a word, a phrase, or a tradition that distinguishes one group from another. But because of that, it has come to mean a platitude or a truism. And I think that's really in the sense that he's using this. Maybe the better word that we would all know by is a trope. You familiar with the word trope? You know, which is kind of an overused theme or device or something. So he's saying, we avoid this necessary and creative tension when we try to resolve and end it all with old shibboleths, old tropes, old platitudes, like in the real world or on the bottom line. Much of the gospel has been avoided by such easy dismissals of soul wisdom, which is seldom, first of all, practical, efficient, or revenue generating. The bottom line of the gospel is that most of us have to hit some kind of bottom before we even start the real spiritual journey. Up to that point, it is mostly religion as opposed to spirituality. At the bottom, though, there is little time or interest in being totally practical, efficient, or revenue generating. You just want to breathe fresh air. The true gospel is always fresh air and spacious breathing room. So our question now becomes, how can I honor the legitimate needs of the first half of life while creating space, vision, time, and grace for the second? The holding of this tension is the very shape of wisdom. Only hermits and some retired people can almost totally forget the first and devote themselves totally to the second, but even they must eat, drink, and find housing and clothing. The human art form is in uniting fruitful activity with a contemplative stance, not one or the other, but always both at the same time. So there he's kind of bringing together what we were talking about just a couple of paragraphs ago. Groups of any kind have to be concerned with such practical things, but that is exactly why you will become impatient with such institutions if you're in the second half of life, including the church, as you grow older and wiser. The implications are staggering. Historically, in the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, you just went off to the side and became a monk or a nun. But now even religious life suffers from the same institutionalization and is not always a satellite of freedom or the wisdom school that it was meant to be. We have been churchified, I am afraid. I remember I wrote in the Fifth Way that there is no such thing as a Christian church. There's no such thing as a Christian company. There's no such thing as a Christian any institution, because an institution can't be Christian. An institution can't be compassionate. An institution can't do any of the things that a Christian is supposed to do. Now, the people within the church or the company, they can be Christian. So you can have a church made up of Christians, but the church itself is just an institution. It has to do what any institution has to do. You know, we have these kind of pedestals that we want to put our churches on as if there's some kind of different animal than Facebook or Google, but they're not. They're just an institution that has to eat, live, and breathe and do all the things that institutions do in order to survive. Were you going to say something, Randy?
No, I was just gonna.
Okay. It is very rare to really absorb the gospel or wisdom thinking in the first half of life. So we settle for answers and organizations and build the whole structure around such non-answers. He's talking about literalism there. He's talking about legalism there. I mean, that's what we do in order to create the house that stands, in order to create the certainty in the walls of our fortress that people want to shelter within. You cannot turn the other cheek if you're an American, nor can you have Eucharistic table fellowship with non-Catholics if you're a Catholic. You end up denying the first and deeper river for the sake of the small river that everybody happens to be floating on. In fact, you just try to improve the barges, boats, and bridges on this small upper river so that people can float more comfortably. The Catholic Church is now expending huge amounts of effort and time changing words in the liturgy back to the quote-unquote original Latin, which Jesus never spoke and was actually the language of his oppressors. While the world is facing unparalleled disasters at every level, the sanctuary is the only world where the clergy still have a bit of control, it seems. So again, the meticulous navigating of our small river surpasses ever diving into the big river. It makes me wonder if Jesus' first definition of church as 2 or 3 gathered in my name is not still the best way to avoid these sorts of illusions. So many people I know who are doing truly helpful and healing ministry find their primary support from a couple of enlightened friends, and only secondarily, if at all, from the larger organization. Larger institutions might well provide the skeleton, but the muscle, meat, and miracles invariably happen at the local level. And I would say that's always the case. Real change comes from the bottom up, not from the top down, not change that actually lasts. So he's making this needed and great distinction between our institutions and ourselves. You know, as we enter into the second half of life, our institutions are going to be left behind spiritually because they have to, by definition, be operating on first half of life principles in order to survive. But if enough people within those institutions are operating at the second half of life, they can transform the direction of the institution, maybe to its detriment in terms of how efficient it is, how much revenue it raises, and all of that. But at least it's going to maintain some kind of integrity in terms of what its stated mission is supposed to be. All right, we just read a bunch. Any thoughts on any of that?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I've talked about that saying from the Desert Fathers that one Christian is no Christian. So I was just wondering, text of where he talks about Jesus's first definition of the church as 2 or 3 gathered in my name. Is that different than the first statement I made, or?
The first statement you made, you mean one Christian is no Christian?
Right.
Oh, that's a quotation from one of Jesus saying where he says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there also. So basically, the allusion there is to the witnesses in the Jewish court. You needed at least 2 witnesses, 2 or 3 witnesses in order to actually convict someone. In other words, you needed what they called a minim or a quorum in order to be able to actually have a court, to be able to convict. So the same thing is there. You know, you need to have this quorum in order to have an actual church, have an actual gathering. But it doesn't mean that if one person's there, that God is not there. You know, But he's saying that in order for us to actually have a gathering, obviously we need 2 or 3, but that's that idea of a quorum. Okay. So, but that doesn't invalidate the first statement that one Christian is no Christian, in the sense that Christianity has to be lived out in community of some kind. Has to be community. Love needs the beloved. Love needs the object in order to be able to actually complete the circuit.
But the Desert Fathers moved away from institution,
They did, but not from community.
right? Right.
And as time went on, as the centuries rolled on in Christian monasticism, some of the institutions ended up being kind of unrecognizable from the original fathers' concepts and principles. In fact, there are some of the sayings of the Desert Fathers where individual elders, some of the really old and pure elders, are coming into conflict with some of the practices within the communities, the monastic communities, because they had to, as soon as you got a group, you got to have rules, and they had to have rules, and they had to have punishments, and they had to, this and that, and they are coming into conflict with that because now they're becoming an institution. So it's inevitable that any group is going to have to become institutionalized if it's going to survive as itself, as a group, as a recognizable group. And so you need those, but there has to be a balance. If there isn't a balance, an intentional and conscious balance within that community, that we are going to hold as much as we possibly can, or balance second half of life and first half of life principles in order to continue to survive, but stay with our mission and vision and purpose, then we're lost. We will just slide automatically into a first half of life understanding. And it always happens. It always happens. I'm proud of the fact that for 15 years, the effect has remained, as I would say as much as second half of life as it possibly can, but that's also what's kept it small. Let's be honest. We don't have the size, we haven't grown. And because we're small, it's easier not to be quite so institutionalized, right? The larger you get, the more you need all the trappings of corporate life and institution in order to survive. And since we're small, we don't have that. But we've also worked hard to keep the org chart flat. There is no hierarchy. It's just people that are identified by their roles and not by status or rank, and other things that we've done to make sure that we're not dictating what people need to believe in order to be a part of. We don't keep membership roles. If you're there, you're a member. If you're not, you're not. We have done a lot of things to try to be kind of as as much a part of anarchy as possible, and yet still cohese enough to be able to continue. But because we're small, we have the option of doing some of that. But we've also had the will to do that. Our board has been gathered around these principles, and most of our membership has been gathered around these principles, and so it continues to hold its shape somewhat. But if we got too big, we would really have a lot more tension than we do, trying to hold that line and try to keep the business going at the same time.
Dave,
Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
William, would you unmute? I want to ask you a question, because that's what I experienced at Saddleback, and that's where I met William.
I was thinking of Saddleback throughout and the cool thing was I met some really cool people at Saddleback that didn't toe the company line, but like he was saying, like the church is the skeleton and we don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Like they have to have their principles and governing bodies and rules and whatever. But I met some really, really good people there.
I did too, but I did find that I lost the spirituality of it. I mean, I lost the connection I
Mhm,
mean, a few people like, you and I met, and I met a few other people, but
mhm,
outside of the church, I just didn't have the community that I had at the effect. And I felt like I was told what I had to believe. And if I didn't believe it, I was a sinner, or,
mhm.
that I absolutely had to believe everything the pastor said, whether I did or didn't, you had to. And that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, well, I remember one of my first attendances at Saddleback. Rick Warren said, you're not going to find a perfect church. There isn't one. They're all ran by human beings who are flawed, et cetera, et cetera. And if you come here to connect with God, we got enough of that going on, but don't look for perfection. And I thought that was good enough for me.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah,
I'm not saying that his messages weren't good and all. It's just, to me, it was just too institutionalized
and
for
yeah,
me to feel a part of.
yeah.
Well, if you're going to reference the equation between church or Saddleback and a corporation, there, when I was involved with ministry there, I was told there was 300 employees. It's not counting the volunteers. There's 300 people on staff and such. And
Mm,
I had my challenges, and they just kind of said, hey, look, it's the hypocrisy and stuff. When you have 300 people on staff, as far as you are going to have some lack of congruency with what you hear from the sanctuary and what is being done as a corporation, a company and stuff.
mm.
Since we don't have a luxury of a lot of time, I won't go into the story, but I assure you it was just as messed up as the business I worked for, because it was a business. Very much. I'm pretty darn sure it still would be if we were to visit, but that is what it is.
Well, you can't have an entity that large, pulling in that much money and having as much obligation as they have, without being, very tightly organized, and also have the will and the desire to grow to that size. I mean, you got to want that, and you got to be dedicated to it over decades to be able to grow to that size, and then hold on to that size. And so that is, all first half of life stuff. Not to say, as William is saying, that there aren't beautifully, second half of life people and completely focused in the right direction within that. And that's not to say that they don't have principles that are trying to balance everything. But when you get to that size, I mean, just the sheer weight of that structure is pulling you out of balance. And it'd be a full-time job to try to add some ballast to that. So, smaller size, I think, is better for being able to try to strike a good and healthy balance between the two. But that's what we're always up against. That's what you're going to be up against in your individual life and in your family. Hey, a family is a business too. Let's face it, your own household is a business. It's an institution, and it has to function that way on first half of life values. But you can bring in your second half of life values and infuse that and create the balance. So it's up to us, the individual. And you're
Can I
always going to
fire a
find
few
great
people in
people
my
in
family
you.
then, Dave?
I'm sorry, say that again, William.
Can I fire a few people in the family? I got a couple of employees that are slipping.
Don't you wish you could?
Yeah,
That's
I'd go
great,
for that
man.
too, William.
I think we all resemble that remark at one time or another. All right. Second paragraph, page 140. The ego and most institutions demand a tit-for-tat universe, while the soul swims in a sea of abundance, grace, and freedom, which cannot always be organized. Therein lies the rub, right? The abundance and the grace and the freedom of spirit, as beautiful as it is anarchy. You can't organize it. Jesus' words, the Sermon on the Mount, is anarchy. You can't hang an institution on it. That's why the church gravitates to Paul, because you can hang a church on Paul. He's very organized. He's very theological. He tells what needs to happen and done because he was managing groups of churches around the Eastern Mediterranean. Jesus was just dealing with individual hearts, very, very different. And so the ego and most institutions demand a tit for tat universe. That's that retributive justice that we were just talking about on Sunday, right? You get rewarded for things that the group likes, the institution likes, and that advance the institution, and you get punished for the things that don't. That's that same retributive, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, tit for tat kind of justice. Remember, in the gospel, at the end of the day, the employer pays those who worked part of the day just as much as those who worked the whole day. This does not compute, except at the level of soul. Soulful people temper our tantrums by their calm, lessen our urgency by their peace, exhibit a world of options and alternatives when all the conversation turns into dualistic bickering. Soulful people are the necessary salt, yeast, and light needed to grow groups up. Note that Jesus does not demand that we be the whole meal, the full loaf, or the illuminated city itself, but we are to be the quiet undertow and overglow that makes all of these happen. This is why all institutions need second half of life people in their ranks. Just 2 or 3 in each organization are enough to keep them from total self-interest. That might be a little pie in the sky. I think if you put 2 or 3 into Saddleback, I don't know that that's going to tip the scales much. But it could do it in the group the size of the effect, and it can certainly do it in your family. You know, you don't need a majority. You just need to hit that tipping point, right? If there are not a few soulful people in each group, you can be sure that those who come at the end of the day, who are at the back of the line, or who live on the edge of what we call normal, will never get paid. Sadly, that seems to be the direction of both our politics and our churches. So we have to prepare and equip the 2 or 3 second half of lifers in how to stay in there with mostly first half of lifers. That is surely what Jesus meant by carrying the cross. Maybe one interpretation of carrying the cross anyway, right? What's that, William?
Sorry.
Okay. When I say that almost all groups and institutions are first half of life structures, I say that not to discourage you, but in fact, just the opposite. I say it first of all because it is true, but also to keep you from being depressed or losing all hope by having false expectations. Don't expect or demand from groups what they usually cannot give. Kathy and I were just talking about this earlier today. Doing so will make you, I'm sorry, Kath, was that you?
Yep, I just said yep.
Yeah. So here it is again. Doing so, okay, don't expect or demand from groups what they usually cannot give. Doing so will make you needlessly angry and reactionary. They must and will be concerned with identity, boundaries, self-maintenance, self-perpetuation, and self-congratulation. Okay, so who's he talking about? Groups that are first half of life structures must and will be concerned with identity, right? You have to believe what the pastor believes. We got to purify and hang on to our identity with boundaries. You know, this is what you do. You can't cross this line, and other people who cross this line are not part of our clan. Self-maintenance. You got to tithe. And it's got to be that 10%, right? And self-perpetuation and self-congratulation. You see that in institutionalized church. You see that in politics and in government. Everywhere that we have companies, we have the same kind of attitude. This is their nature and purpose. The most you can hope for is a few enlightened leaders and policies now and then from among those 2 or 3 gathered in my name. In your second half of life, you can actually bless others in what they feel they must do. Allow them to do what they must do. Challenge them if they are hurting themselves or others. But you can no longer join them in the first half of life. You can belong to such institutions for all the good that they do, but you no longer put all your eggs in that one basket. I think that's a real important point. So what we're not saying is that you have to run from your church. You have to run from your company or your political party because they are basically first half of life in attitude and in function and in execution. You know, we need and want to stay there, but we're not putting all of our resources. We're not relying on them the way that we once did. I remember when remember the Franciscan that I told you about, the one that said, you know, all I can tell you is what I'm convinced of. Go become convinced of what you're convinced of. He's the same priest that I asked one time when we had a conversation, because he stood so far outside of Catholic theology. I asked him, why don't you leave the church? How can you stay here when what you believe is so outside of Catholicism? And he laughed and he just said, I've been a priest for 50 years. I'm going to die a priest. That was he was master of brevity. That was his whole answer to me. Really didn't need justification. But basically what he was saying is the same thing here. You know, he wasn't expecting to change Catholicism, but he wasn't going to kowtow to it either in his own personal theology and his personal ethic. But he saw himself as one of the factors or one of the forces that could start a movement within Catholicism. He was one of the voices that was crying in the wilderness, right? And he longed to get out from his position as the director of Serra Retreat so he could get out. He wanted to be itinerant and be able to go to various high schools, Catholic high schools, and be able to talk to young people who still had the option for change in them, and not the frozen chosen that showed up every year to the same retreat at the same weekend of the year with never any change in 12 months, you know. But this is kind of where he's going at. We don't have to leave where we are. We can stay, but we bring our sensibilities and our spirituality to the process as best we can. This will keep you and others from unnecessary frustration and anger, and from knocking on doors that cannot be opened from the other side. In short, this is what I mean by emerging Christianity. So this is where this book is kind of dating itself a little bit. We don't really use emerging Christianity anymore, but 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was the big deal, emerging Christianity. And it was the idea that Christianity is evolving, Christianity is changing, it's emerging into something new, and we don't know what that new thing is. It's in the process of emerging. But it was the wave front, the front line of thinkers like Richard Rohr in both Catholic and Protestant traditions that were pushing the envelope of scriptural interpretation, of theology and doctrine, of practice, the whole 9 yards, and trying to get to a more holistic view of Christianity, a less exclusionary view of Christianity. And so this is what he says is meant by this. It's those of us willing to stay in the place that we were planted and then try to bloom there, but bringing who we are, instead of letting the institution change us, to see what we can change, at least in the circles that we have any influence over in that institution. And boy, emerging Christianity sure had a bad name at the church I was at. It was a 4-letter word back then.
Yes.
All right. Even Jesus said that it would be a waste of time to throw our seeds on the busy footpath, the rocky soil, or among the thorns. He told us we should wait for receptive soil. I call such people multipliers, contemplatives, or change agents. Today, I often find this receptive soil more outside of churches than within, many of which have lost that necessary beginner's mind, both as groups and as individuals. And we talked about this a while back, the idea of beginner's mind, to be able to retain that ability to see something as if it's new. even if you've seen it a million times. You know, this is one of the qualities of a child, and Jesus is always holding a child up as being emblematic of kingdom. But the child sees everything as new. The child is always seeing, you know, pointing fingers and excited about things. To keep that beginner's mind, when you first see something or study it for the first time, and you have that enthusiasm and you have that, you know, that dry sponge quality, you're just soaking everything in. You know, once we have stayed in the church for a while, and we have now that illusion of certainty that kind of drops like a curtain in front of us, and we have already accepted what the group thinks, and we have counted it as absolutely certain, and we're right, and everyone on the other side of this curtain is wrong. You can't have that beginner's mind anymore. And you can't have that receptive soil. We've already decided what truth is. We've already decided what direction it comes from. So we're never going to be attentive to the truth that comes from a different direction. And so we just reject it out of hand. We don't even see it. We're not even aware of it because it doesn't comport with the filter of our worldview. Yet Jesus predicted it himself. The children of this world are often more clever than the children of light, which is probably why he made the sinner, the outsider, the Gentile, the Samaritan, the woman, the Roman centurion, the poor person, and the leper, the heroes and heroines of his story. So he's looking outside of Judaism for that receptivity. He's looking outside of Judaism for that beginner's mind, and for someone who's at the precipice and is actually able to make a change. Because the people that were too invested in Judaism as it stood, even in the first century, were the last ones that were going to change. So who was following Jesus around? Well, it wasn't the Pharisees, except to look for ways to trip him up, at least after they had heard a little bit. It was the people who were marginalized. It was the outsiders, the outcast. You know, that's who are going to be most receptive, those who are least invested in any institution. Just pure human nature at this point. Let me finish this section and then we can talk a little bit about it. With so many good and sincere people in their ranks, the only way that you can explain why the religions formed in the name of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad became groups that defined themselves by exclusion and againstness is that history up to now has largely been asking first half of life questions. I didn't read that sentence very well. Let me try it one more time. With so many good and sincere people in their ranks, the only way you can explain why the religions formed in the name of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad became groups that defined themselves by exclusion and againstness is that history up to now has largely been asking first half of life questions. It is always interesting to me that the power of the keys that Jesus gave to Peter, both to bind and to loose, is invariably used to bind and so seldom used to loose, unless it is to the church institution's advantage. But when I remember that the first half of life defines itself by no, and the second half of life by yes, I can understand. I am grateful that Jesus himself was a teacher from the second half of life, who, according to Paul, always said yes. All right. That was a lot of reading and a lot of my soliloquizing. Any thoughts or questions or comments?
It's interesting, very interesting.
Okay.
What stuck with me in page 132, the first sentence, emerging Christianity, and you said evolving, you know, there's the evolution of religion in the church, that like some Christians don't believe in evolution. It's just a it's just a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But not only that, truth is truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once it's true, it shouldn't change, right? Or if it did, it wouldn't be true anymore, right? So how can the church be changing if it's true? If it's already true, it's just going to have to keep staying true. But at the same time, the spirit is always in motion, never static. That's how you know that you are of the Spirit, is if you're in motion. And so you got these two contrasting ideas. You know, the angel said to the women who first came to the tomb on Easter morning, why do you look for the living among the dead? Why do you look for something that's in motion in a place where everything's static? You know, this is the whole crux of it here. You know, the church has to be in motion if it's still flowing with the Spirit, which means it's going to be moving and changing as it does. It's going to be becoming relevant to each generation in each geographic location. All ethics are situational, after all. They have to exist within the context in which they're being used. It's not a static rule or standard that we can apply across the board. And the church would be the same way. It must fit into the lives of the people that it is trying to help and address and guide. So, but these are two different viewpoints, you know. So once we have established what we think is certainty in the church, then it becomes static. And then it becomes non-spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and what he was alluding to, the againstness, you know, my limited experience during time with Saddleback, individuals saying, you know, if you don't agree with this inerrant Bible, you know, the world is wrong. We're the ones that are right. There was zero flexibility involved with it. And that, again, it was, what they were against. All these, it was very much about the no's and not about the yeses. Right. And and obviously I didn't hang around there much longer. I was devoted at that time. There certainly was many good things that came from that. But perhaps the one was being able to make the, being so convicted with my journey of having an understanding of what my relationship with God is and with, well, the world, to go, no, this isn't a good fit for me. This is, you know, so knowing that I guess I had a backbone, kind of saying, because I'm very codependent at that time. That was perhaps one of the best things. But and again, there's a lot of really wonderful people I've met there, wonderful people, but there is definitely, that was a very commonality was the rigidity of it. If you got outside of the common paradigms and such, like again, how last night I joked around about the holy hand grenade, talking about God is everywhere, every when, even in the tragedy. That would have probably got me at the very least some rolled eyeballs, you know, type of thing. But you know, they, you know, talking about first half of life stuff. You know, one of the things that Rick Warren talked about that I was all in for at the time was, who in heaven will thank you for introducing them to Jesus? Okay. Yeah, wouldn't that be cool that you know, there's some people that are giving me a pat on the back and stuff, and thank you so much for introducing me to Jesus, so I get to go to heaven. And so it's because of me that they're in heaven, type of stuff. So very much first half of life was that experience. And again, it's been a long time since I checked it out, but I wouldn't be surprised that it would be within, you know, 10 minutes go, yep, this is the stuff we've been talking about first half of life church.
Nice. Yeah.
You know, my turn?
Go for it.
When I was back east, you know, I went with my daughter and her family to a very institutionalized church. And that was one of the things that I noticed. I love that line. I'm grateful that Jesus himself was a teacher from the second half of life who always said yes. And like you were just saying, Randy, when I was at their church, all I heard was no. You know, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. No, they are sinners. They can't, you know, especially homosexual, especially, you know, that. And they definitely weren't about yes. They definitely were not about the second half of life. And not that there aren't good people there. My daughter and her son and my son-in-law are good people, but they preached to them exclusion. You know, only if you do this will you go to heaven. Only if you this, that will you, you know, or like you said, Randy, they really push bringing people to Jesus, so that, you can go to heaven if you bring more. And the more people you bring to church, the more chance you have of going to heaven. It just, I only went once and I could not go back. I said, this is exclusion. This is not, institutionalized,
Right.
first life. And so to hear that I never thought of it this way, that he lived the second half of life. I never thought of it that way. And he always said yes. So this is like mind blowing to me right now. If I were to say this to my daughter and my son-in-law,
Right.
Well, for me, the turning point
for me. They would pray
was
for me.
John 3:16-17.
Say it again.
The exclusiveness that Jesus says in John 16 and 17, but especially John 3:17. For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only son. So again, so the believing shall have eternal life. For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Now, in 2 sentences, world is mentioned 4 times by Jesus. That is, from my understanding of studying the Bible and stuff, that meant that was an emphasis when you saw the word repeated. Jesus was, again, as much as 3:16 is quoted, 17 not as much. But to me, all of a sudden, it was just like, no, Jesus was preaching exclusivity, not inclusive. This is available to everyone, and if for some reason someone doesn't go and do the altar call and accept Jesus into your life, again, it seems contradictory that all of a sudden now God's going to go, get away from me, I don't know you, kind of stuff that they were preaching. And again, I was kind of transitioning into the next, like pushing against that, going, this is illogical to me, explain to me this. And it was basically, I got back as like, you're wrong. Can you just accept the truth of the gospel? Do not be going out and talking heresy like this type of stuff, which again, I concluded it's like, oh, so free thinking, questioning is not allowed in this fellowship. And to me, that was bordering on being cultish. And therefore,
I just did a meditation the other day on John 19, where he talks about hope and grace. And in the meditation, it said, hope and grace are only mentioned a handful of times in the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, Jesus talks about grace and hope like 113 times in the New Testament, that's why he came also is to give us hope and give us grace. And I found that, for all of us, not just for those of us that follow the rules, but that Jesus came to bring us hope and to give us grace.
Nice.
Were you going to add something, William?
Well, I had a couple of thoughts. First one is one of my favorite lines from Marsha Linehan, and it's about just saying yes to the mystery of being alive, staying in that space. And the second thought I had was in response to something you said. The spirit is always in motion. It's not static. And it made me think of Lao Tzu talking about this idea that things that are young and flexible, versus things that are alive has flexibility to them, but things that are dead are brittle. And, when the wind is heavy, the flexible plant can sway in the wind, but the brittle ones will break, and it just made me think of like the institutions that the more brittle they become, the more cumbersome they become, and how much that need for movement and flexibility and yeses over no's kind of comes into picture.
And not only that, the more that the people within them, especially at the leadership level, are presented with conflicts of interest, and this is something that, I've thought about that, probably God never intended there to be a professional clergy, because there's so much conflict of interest that comes with the job. because often the job in the second half of life is working against the first half of life principles that you have to be operating under in order to have a job and to have a paycheck, you know, and to know that you're still going to be around next year or the year after that. And that conflict, as the institution grows, as the stakes get higher, that conflict weighs heavier and heavier on especially the top leadership, but really everybody in the institution. And so it's making us less and less able to do what you're talking about, William, to be able to sway, to be able to move with the spirit, because now you're threatening your own livelihood. And so it's a real it's a walking through a minefield, let's put it that way. It's a very fine line that we're trying to walk here. It's not that it can't be done. And this isn't a session to bash institutional churches, because they do a lot of good. Obviously, he says that in the text here. And as we've all said, you know, there are beautiful people in every one of these organizations. But if we lose sight of what's going on, each one of us, then we are going to be prey to being able to fall into that the seductive call, the siren song of the first half of life, because that is the strongest voice in the world, our first half of life values. So we're constantly trying to swim upstream like salmon in order to be able to hang on to our balance. And so it's important for us to be aware of what it is we're up against as we do this from our own churches and from our own families and everything else that is, you know, living and breathing in terms of an institution. So as long as we keep that in our intentional way of living, then we'll be able to hang on, you know, to our integrity, like Job did in the midst of his travails, right? Hang on to that integrity.
I think of Marian often and what she has to go through, you know, at her job, and being, you know, the customers and the institution and the, you know, it just, I don't know.
Yeah, and for Marian as an empath, you know, she just soaks all that stuff up from the other side of the conveyor belt.
It's got to be even harder for her to swim upstream.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, we didn't get as far as I'd hoped. I was thinking we'd get to the end of loneliness and solitude as well, but we are reading about as fast as we could possibly go, right? So that leaves us another 17 pages for, I don't know. I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a speed reading.
We're going to have to read some on our own.
Yeah.
Or we complete it in January and then choose a new book, and so we have time.
Yeah,
it could be a final refresh.
Yeah, I like that.
True.
What you guys said you liked was finishing in January, and
it doesn't.
And then pick a new book.
It doesn't have a clean ending like we would OCD like.
Yeah.
I like that.
For recognizing that there, William. Yeah, we
But
gotta.
it still gives us.
What's that, Kathy?
I was just saying, it still gives us a chance to kind of refresh on what we read, just as a recap, so we won't forget it over the holiday anyway, and then we can go to the next book, whatever that is.
Okay.
Don't feel rushed. I feel
I agree.
rushed.
Yeah.
All right.
Good point, Ellen. Let's not feel rushed.
So when did we start with this book? This was in
February.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
I know. Is that crazy?
It doesn't matter. It's like, as long as we're enjoying it, as long as we're learning.
Amen, sister.
Yeah, but there's also only, notice there's only 10 of us left. You know,
And we had almost twice as much when we started.
Actually, when we first started, we had usually in the low 30s in those first few weeks. Now that quickly dropped down, and we kind of averaged out in the low 20s. You know, and then the high teens, and then now we're 10.
Yeah, we lost 4 from Arizona, so that's part of it.
I know. We lost Scott too. Where'd Scott go?
He said something about pray for his sister. He's having an emergency.
Personal.
When did he say that?
It was in the
Look in
chat.
chat. He said,
Oh, in the
he put in chat.
I don't see that.
Oh,
Oh.
It was there. It said,
Yeah.
I gotta go. I've got an emergency with my sister. Pray for my sister Randy.
Oh, I do see it. It's up there. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Vaughn came and signed out too. He said buenos noches. And I
So
said
you
bye
know,
to him,
Dave,
but what's that, Kathy?
everybody's gonna have New Year's resolutions, and so the group's gonna get real big again in January.
That's
Yeah,
right.
right. Yeah.
Because they
exactly.
don't know we're reading the same book.
Like joining the gym. We're all gonna join the gym in January again.
Yeah.
We're gonna join again. Well,
So join the
okay.
gym
It's like I
for
haven't been here for
workout.
about 4 weeks just because there was just no way for me to, do it with kids around and so forth. So there's still, Judy's still out there and other people are still out there with us.
Yeah, we didn't even have Lindy or Judy tonight.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And they usually
she'll be
show up.
back. She'll be back.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I like the idea of let's just keep going until we finish.
All
Yeah.
right. We will do so. Never let it never be said that I cannot be flexible.
There you go.
All right.
You heard it here.
We'll never say it, Dave.
All right. Would anyone like to close us with prayer?
Ooh, nothing.
Out loud.
Go for it, William.
I was going to nominate Randy. But Father, thank you again for another beautiful opportunity to join together and share with each other and think out loud with each other and share in your word. And we know that each of these meetings take us deeper and deeper into knowing you and into living your mission in how we conduct our lives. And we thank you and we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, William.
Thank
Okay,
you,
so there's
William.
only 2 Sundays left in 2022 as well. So we've got next Sunday, and then the following Sunday is our Christmas gathering, the 18th, and then
Mhm.
we're off for Christmas, and then we're back the following Sunday, which is January 1st. So only 2 Sundays left in this year. So we will see you hopefully Sunday, one way or another, or at least you'll see us. Maybe we won't see you if you're streaming.
Mhm.
But until then, have a great rest of the week.
So we're
Everything
off.
will-
We're off the 21st and the 28th.
Yes, and well, we're off the last 2 weeks of the year, so we won't have any Zooms after next week until the first week of January, and we've only got the 2 more Sundays, so we're really winding down. And then we have the Christmas party on the 23rd for those of you who are in the local area. Ellen, I hope you can come.
I
Right.
hope so too.
Friday the 23rd, 6 o'clock. So that would
Mhm.
be great if you could come. and
Plug
join
that
us.
car in. Get it charged.
Yeah.
William, we're gonna send the helicopter, the private jet for you, so you can show up.
I'll be ready. I'll be ready.
Just find the tallest
have your-
roof and stand on it and wait for us.
Yeah, really.
Wave.
All right, I'll be up there.
Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
And good night, Jordana and Linda. And
Good
see you
night.
guys Saturday. Does it look like you'll be able to come, Jordana, on Sunday?
No, my mom is still really ill, so Vernon's gonna wait till she's all better to come back to church. So you guys might have Brian for a while until Vernon comes back, but I'll have him contact you.
Okay, I texted him today, but I didn't hear back yet. So,
Okay, I'll let him know that to contact you.
all righty. Thank
So we
you.
come over on Saturday still, this coming?
What are you asking, Linda?
We're coming over to clean on this coming Saturday still?
Of course.
Yeah, okay, I wasn't sure how it was divvied up or whatever.
All the same.
Great,
Okay, girls.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.
bye, thank you.